spotlights, scandals, and silver screen meltdowns. Welcome to the golden age of Hollywood, where the glamour was real, but so were the catastrophes. These weren't just actresses, they were icons, legends, and occasionally disasters in designer heels. From career-killing choices to studio feuds that aged like sour champagne, these women lit up the screen and then burned the whole soundstage down. Fame was fast, failure was faster, and Hollywood? It never forgets, unless you ask it to remember. This is 25 Golden Age actresses who paid the price for one bad decision, and it gets messier from here. Before we dive headfirst into the chaos, hit that subscribe button, because let's be honest, you clearly have a taste for vintage drama. While you're at it, drop a comment. Where in the world are you watching from, and what ungodly hour is it right now? Are you up late with insomnia or pretending to work with headphones on? Either way, you're in the right place. 1. Judy Garland. It's easy to forget that Judy Garland didn't stumble into ruin. She was professionally escorted there by the very industry that sold her smile. At just 16, she became America's glittering tragedy in waiting, drugged by the studio to sleep less, eat less, and sing more. MGM, in all its gilded wisdom, decided Judy was their prize pony, and ponies don't get lunch breaks, they get pills. She missed rehearsals, vanished from sets, and spiraled in front of an audience trained to confuse collapse with charisma. By the time she was fired from Annie Get Your Gun, it wasn't a mystery, it was a foregone conclusion. And yet, everyone pretended to be shocked. Unreliable, they said, like she hadn't been chemically engineered into unreliability. Studio execs wagged their fingers with the same hands that signed her prescription orders. Judy didn't just lose roles. She lost hours, years, a sense of who she was before the spotlight surgically removed her self-worth. But even as her career stalled, her image kept marching forward, rosy-cheeked, doe-eyed, and silently screaming. And in the most Hollywood twist of all, the machine that broke her later asked her to smile for the cameras one last time, just long enough to make it feel redemptive. We love our ingenues tragic, but not too tragic, just enough to sing through the sadness. And just when you think it couldn't get messier than chemically enforced girlhood, along came the blonde bombshell who fought her studio like a lion in lipstick, and nearly blew up her own legend in the process. 2. Marilyn Monroe. Marilyn Monroe didn't want to be smart. She was smart, but Hollywood wanted her stupid, curvy, and perfectly naive, like a beautiful vase you weren't supposed to ask if it had read Nietzsche. And for a while, Marilyn played along. She cooed, she giggled, she tilted her head just right. But then she did something unforgivable in 1950s America. She asked for better scripts. She broke her contract with Fox, walked out on the same system that made her iconic, and demanded to be seen as an actress, not a talking hourglass. She even started her own production company, a move that made every cigar-chomping executive in Hollywood clutch their pearls. A woman controlling her image? Dangerous. Even fatal. Her rebellion was strategic, yes, but also chaotic. The press painted her as unstable. The studio suspended her, and rumors outpaced facts like wildfire in heels. Ironically, the more she tried to reshape her career, the more it twisted into a funhouse mirror version of itself. She won some battles, Bus Stop, The Prince, and The Showgirl, but the war never really ended. Monroe wasn't destroyed by stupidity. She was destroyed by the audacity to be intelligent in a system that profited from her infantilization. And as she tried to crawl out of her own shadow, the spotlight only got hotter, harsher, and more desperate. By the time her voice stopped echoing through sound stages, the silence was deafening. But before the dust even settled, another titan of talent stepped up, only to challenge the system legally, lose spectacularly, and pay the price with her own career. If you're still here 2 scandals deep, you're clearly one of us. So go ahead and subscribe for more beautifully chaotic Hollywood history. And while you're spiraling with us, tell us in the comments, where are you watching from, and what time is it right now? Midnight in Milwaukee? Noon in New Zealand? We want to know who's keeping the legends alive. One questionable decision at a time. 3. Bette Davis. Bette Davis always walked into a room like she'd already won the argument because, frankly, she usually had. But then came the moment she tried to win a fight even Hollywood's most stubborn rebels couldn't crack. A lawsuit against Warner Brothers. Not a polite disagreement. Not a gentle negotiation. An actual lawsuit, filed with the certainty of someone who believed justice was real and studios were reasonable. Her complaint? Warner Brothers kept giving her roles so dull they made beige look dramatic. So she packed her pride, her cigarette holder, and her unwavering glare, and marched into a British courtroom to declare independence from the studio system. A bold stand for artistic integrity, yes. A brilliant strategic move? Not exactly. The judge didn't buy it. The lawyers didn't budge. And in the exquisite irony only Hollywood's golden era could produce, Warner Brothers used her attempt at emancipation as proof that she was legally obligated to them even more firmly than before. It was the celestial equivalent of trying to leave a bad relationship and being told, "Actually, you now have to spend more time together." When she returned to Hollywood, she didn't come back as a liberated artist. She returned as the woman who had publicly lost. And executives remembered that. Every cold shoulder on a studio lot was a reminder that she challenged the empire, and the empire stamped its logo right back on her forehead. She eventually clawed herself into better roles, but the sting lingered like an echo behind every close-up. Yet, nothing ignited Bette Davis quite like a rivalry. And standing just across the soundstage was a woman who would turn that slow-burning frustration into a blazing Hollywood civil war. One that would cost them both far more than either expected. 4. Joan Crawford. Joan Crawford didn't feud. She waged war, with the poise of a general who applied lipstick before battle. By the early 1960s, her stardom had dimmed, her roles had shrunk, and her public image was wobbling like a chandelier in an earthquake. So, she signed on to Whatever Happened to Baby Jane, a psychological thriller starring two legends who could barely exist in the same oxygen supply. Crawford saw it as her last great chance. What she didn't see, or maybe didn't care about, was that sharing the screen with Bette Davis was like stepping into a lion's den wearing perfume called provocation. Their rivalry was legendary, but working together turned it into something volcanic. Every glare on screen had an off-screen twin. Every tense pause was almost too convincing. Crawford accused Davis of trying to hurt her physically. Davis accused Crawford of sabotaging her Oscar campaign. Both accused each other of everything short of arson. The film was a hit, but the victory was poisoned. Hollywood didn't admire the drama. It recoiled from it. Producers whispered that casting either woman meant inheriting the feud. Opportunities shrank. Invitations dried. The industry is many things, but it rarely rewards women who appear hard to manage, especially once they're past the age Hollywood finds convenient. Crawford's gamble brought her back into the spotlight, just long enough to show the world how fiercely she fought to stay there. But after the bright flash faded, the glare of her rivalry lingered heavier than her performance. And as the feud cooled, another Hollywood star stepped forward, one whose personal life spiraled into scandal so public, so sensational that it made studio feuds look like schoolyard squabbles. 5. Lana Turner. Lana Turner never intended to become a tabloid headline, but Hollywood has a way of turning everyday turbulence into national spectacle. She entered the industry as the poster child of glamour, a teenager discovered at a soda fountain, transformed into a studio-manufactured dream. But dreams in Hollywood tend to come with fine print, and Lana's fine print arrived in the form of Johnny Stompanato, a mob-affiliated charmer whose reputation walked into a room 3 minutes before he did. Their relationship was a pressure cooker disguised as romance. He was possessive, volatile, and endlessly drawn to the bright glow of Lana's fame. She, in turn, kept trying to navigate the impossible triangle of career obligations, public scrutiny, and the kind of personal chaos that studios pretended didn't exist until it splashed across the front page. Hollywood's golden age wasn't known for empathy. It was known for damage control dressed in pearls. When their private life spilled into public view, the press descended like hawks spotting a shiny object. Headlines didn't bother with nuance. They favored dramatic simplification. Lana Turner, the glamorous starlet, entangled with a man the authorities already kept an eye on. The scandal didn't end her career outright, but it cast a shadow long enough to dim even MGM's carefully installed lighting. She survived the frenzy, but she didn't escape it. Every interview, every appearance, every new rumor became tethered to the old story. Hollywood loves a comeback, but it loves a scandal even more, and Lana learned that the hard way. And just when it seemed like nothing could top the spectacle of a mob-soaked romance derailing a Hollywood icon, along came an actress whose personal life caused an international uproar, one that reached far beyond movie studios and straight into the halls of government. 6. Ingrid Bergman. Ingrid Bergman didn't spark controversy. She detonated it, unintentionally and spectacularly, like someone lighting a candle and accidentally triggering the sprinkler system for an entire nation. At the height of her fame, she was the industry's beloved paradox. Radiant but natural, poised but human, adored but somehow above the melodrama of Hollywood's usual scandals. Until she wasn't. Her decision to begin a relationship with director Roberto Rossellini while still married wasn't the first Hollywood affair, nor the last, but it became the most infamous. The public didn't just raise an eyebrow. It practically raised a courtroom. Senators condemned her on the congressional floor. Newspapers declared moral emergencies. Clergy members weighed in. It was as if Ingrid had personally tested the structural integrity of America's collective hypocrisy. Studios, ever mindful of profits, responded with cold precision. Work offers dried. Doors closed. Her image, once built on luminous sincerity, became a battleground for debates about morality, celebrity, and who gets to set the standard for public virtue. Ironically, Bergman wasn't running from the scandal. She was running toward artistic freedom. In Italy, she found creative partnership, meaningful roles, and a life beyond the studio system's velvet handcuffs. But in Hollywood, absence doesn't make the heart grow fonder. It makes the heart recast. By the time she returned years later, celebrated again and triumphant, she had already learned the most bitter rule of old Hollywood. An actress could be forgiven for bad films, bad fashion choices, even bad box office. But bad timing? That could exile you. And just as Bergman proved that even the most respected star could be toppled by personal headlines, another screen legend stepped into the ring. One whose perpetual departures from Hollywood turned her fame into a flickering, unpredictable flame. 7. Rita Hayworth. Rita Hayworth was once dubbed the love goddess, but for someone idolized by millions, she spent a suspicious amount of time trying to escape the very system that made her famous. She wasn't just a Hollywood icon, she was a brand, a hairstyle, a poster on every soldier's barrack wall. But behind the allure was a woman perpetually trying to outrun the studio leash, and more often than not, failing. Her fame skyrocketed with Gilda, but instead of capitalizing on the momentum, Rita took the less expected route. She left, multiple times. Not for artistic retreats or secret projects, but for marriages that seemed less like fairy tales and more like slow-moving catastrophes. Each time she stepped away from the screen for love, Hollywood waited politely, and then moved on without her. It wasn't just the time away, it was the message it sent. In a system where actresses were expected to grin, bear it, and stay on schedule, Rita's disappearances were seen as high treason. Studio bosses didn't care about emotional burnout or marital implosions. They cared about box office reliability. And Rita, in their eyes, had become too unpredictable. By the time she tried to re-enter the Hollywood bloodstream, the industry had already picked new faces, fresh icons, and fewer complications. The tragedy wasn't just that she left. It was that each return made her seem less like a comeback queen and more like a faded headline trying to be current again. And if leaving Hollywood at the wrong time could stall a career, Imagine what happened when someone stayed, but challenged society's most rigid taboos with one defiant relationship that would nearly cost her everything. 8. Kim Novak. Kim Novak was never Hollywood's safest bet, but she was one of its most captivating. Cool, enigmatic, slightly aloof. She didn't smile on command, and studios never quite knew what to do with that. But her biggest gamble wasn't artistic, it was personal. In the late 1950s, Novak began a relationship with Sammy Davis Jr., a man whose only disqualifying trait in the eyes of the industry was that he didn't fit into their outdated picture of who she was allowed to love. This was an era where studio heads still considered interracial relationships bad optics. Novak, still under contract at Columbia Pictures, was seen as an investment, an image carefully built to appeal to Middle America. And Middle America, according to every executive in a tailored suit, wasn't ready for Kim Novak and Sammy Davis Jr. The studio's reaction? Not subtle, not quiet, not forgiving. Behind the scenes, pressure was applied with industrial force. There are reports, never denied, that Davis was threatened, blackmailed, and ultimately forced to back away. Novak, too, was warned. She kept her dignity, but the message was clear. Challenge the fantasy, and the fantasy will erase you. Her career didn't nosedive overnight, but the brakes were pressed. Gradually, the offers thinned. The starring roles turned into supporting ones. Hollywood had made its decision, and it didn't care how subtle the punishment looked. Kim Novak stood at the crossroads of progress and prejudice. And for a moment, she chose courage. But in 1950s Hollywood, courage had a cost. And speaking of costly decisions made in the spotlight, the next starlet played with fire by turning her real-life love story into front-page chaos, one that almost burned down her career from the inside out. 9. Ava Gardner. Ava Gardner never pretended to be America's sweetheart. She was more interested in being her own wild, uncompromising self. That made her unforgettable on screen and nearly unmanageable off it. She was the studio system's favorite contradiction, a Southern beauty with the mouth of a sailor and the instincts of a prizefighter. But while her screen presence smoldered with mystery, her personal life burned far too brightly for Hollywood's comfort. The press was obsessed with her love life, and Ava, never one to play coy, gave them plenty of fuel. Her marriage to Frank Sinatra was the crown jewel of her tabloid era. Passionate, volatile, and always just a phone call away from making the headlines. For every hit movie she delivered, there was an equally publicized argument, a hotel incident, a quote dropped to a columnist with a drink in hand. And therein lay the problem. Studios like their stars dazzling but domesticated. Ava was dazzling and detonating. The focus slowly shifted from her performances to her problems. Producers hesitated. Insurance agents whispered. Directors wondered if her off-screen drama would overshadow the on-screen work. She wasn't forgotten, but she wasn't fully trusted either. Even as she tried to pivot to more serious roles or disappear into quiet corners of Europe, the shadow of her public persona followed. Ava Gardner didn't destroy her own career exactly. She just made sure it was impossible to separate the actress from the headline. And if Ava's downfall came wrapped in champagne-soaked scandals and glamorous implosions, the next actress proved that sometimes all it takes is a bottle and a bad day on set to send a career into freefall. 10. Veronica Lake. Veronica Lake had the kind of face that could launch 1,000 lighting cues. Ethereal, mysterious, instantly iconic. Her trademark peekaboo hairstyle became a cultural phenomenon, copied by women across the country and immortalized in every wartime pinup collection. But behind the sleepy eyes and soft voice was a woman whose career unraveled with a speed that shocked even her harshest critics. Her decline didn't come from one single scandal. It came from a pattern, missed call times, erratic behavior, a reputation for being difficult that clung to her like fog on a noir film set. By the late 1940s, the golden glow had dimmed, and the studio bosses, never known for their patience, began quietly phasing her out. Much of the damage, it seems, was self-inflicted. Veronica drank, too much, too often, and at the worst possible moments. She clashed with directors, alienated co-stars, and, unlike other screen legends who could charm their way out of trouble, she lacked the studio allies to shield her. By the time she hit her early 30s, her box office draw had evaporated. What makes Lake's fall especially haunting is how fast the industry let her go. One day, she was Hollywood's blonde enigma. The next, she was struggling to book roles in B-movies, the paycheck shrinking as fast as the marquee font. Her story wasn't a spectacular implosion. It was a quiet, brutal fade. And yet, even in that fade, she remains a cautionary tale. Talent matters, but timing and temperament can matter more. And just when you think the industry couldn't be more punishing, along came a trailblazer who pushed every moral boundary on screen and got steamrolled for it in return. 11. Mae West. Mae West didn't break the rules. She body-slammed them in full sequence. In a Hollywood full of delicate euphemisms and moral pearl clutching, she strutted onto the scene with double entendres, unapologetic curves, and dialogue that could make a censor sweat through his collar. But while Mae's fearless wit made her a legend, it also made her the enemy of every moral crusader with a microphone, and eventually even the industry she helped reshape turned its back on her. Her 1933 film, She Done Him Wrong, saved Paramount Pictures from financial collapse, and for a brief, glorious moment, Mae West was the box office. But her style of wink and nudge sensuality came just as the Hays Code, the cinematic equivalent of a social chastity belt, began tightening its grip. Suddenly, her scripts were cut, her lines sanitized, and her films buried under waves of edits that stripped them of their charm. She didn't go quietly, of course. Mae fought back with more innuendo, more attitude, and more of what the censors hated. But the studios didn't want to fight. They wanted obedience. And Mae West had never been obedient a day in her life. As a result, her projects slowed to a crawl. Scripts were rejected outright. By the early 1940s, she was performing stage shows in Vegas while younger, safer starlets stepped into the roles she once could have owned with a single eyebrow raise. Her exile wasn't a disappearance. It was a slow erasure. Hollywood had built a wall around her, brick by brick, until her voice could barely echo through it. And just as Mae West learned what it meant to be too bold for her time, another actress, a former it girl, would discover the dangers of revealing too much to a public that couldn't stop watching her unravel. 12. Clara Bow. Clara Bow was never supposed to survive the talkies. That's what they said anyway. But it wasn't her voice that failed her. It was the noise. The unrelenting, soul-choking noise of public scrutiny, studio control, and a media that fed on her like a buffet. In the 1920s, Clara was the original Hollywood wildfire, bright, chaotic, and impossible to contain. She didn't just star in movies, she became the movies. But behind the flapper grin was someone slowly being devoured by the machine that built her. She spoke too freely, lived too openly, partied too publicly, and for every laugh she gave the world, the press invented 5 new rumors to haunt her. Clara Bow wasn't scandalous because she did outrageous things. She was scandalous because she didn't hide anything. No filters, no scripts. Just raw, messy humanity projected onto a screen that demanded perfection. When the gossip columns ran out of facts, they made up new ones. Stories about orgies, addictions, mental breakdowns, none of which Hollywood publicly corrected, because as long as tickets sold, the truth was optional. The real Clara was exhausted, overwhelmed, and increasingly paranoid. Her career didn't implode. It melted, slowly, under the heat of constant attention and relentless pressure. Eventually, she walked away, retired young, fled the spotlight before it could finish the job, By then, her reputation had been chewed up and sold back to audiences who never knew her but thought they did. And if Clara's downfall came from revealing too much, the next actress would find her legacy collapsing for the opposite reason. Because she refused to play along and walked away from the biggest studio in town without looking back. 13. Hedy Lamarr. Hedy Lamarr had the kind of face that made people forget she also had a brain. A brilliant one. The kind that could invent technologies decades ahead of their time. But in 1940s Hollywood, being beautiful and intelligent didn't win you respect. It got you suspicion. And eventually, exile. Hedy's downfall wasn't one dramatic scandal. It was a slow erosion, brought on by a series of career decisions that looked like rebellion in a world built on obedience. She walked away from MGM in the late 40s, frustrated by the empty glamour roles they kept feeding her. She wanted depth. The studio wanted décolletage. So she left, and for a brief moment, she held her freedom. But freedom, it turns out, doesn't pay well. She turned down roles that could have revived her star. She financed her own film, a risky period piece that flopped, and was left holding the bill. By the time she tried to stage a comeback, Hollywood had already moved on to newer faces with less baggage and fewer opinions. In the end, her legacy as a pioneering inventor wouldn't be fully recognized until long after her Hollywood star had faded. She was too smart for the roles they gave her and too bold to accept them. A dangerous combination. And while Hedy quietly exited the stage with her pride intact but her fortune gone, another actress would take the opposite gamble, sinking a fortune into a single film, betting everything on her own vision, and almost losing it all. 14. Gloria Swanson. Gloria Swanson wasn't just a star. She was a studio unto herself. By the late 1920s, she had more power than most directors, more money than some studios, and a wardrobe that could bankrupt a small nation. So naturally, she did what every ambitious silent film queen eventually tries. She produced her own magnum opus. Queen Kelly. A sweeping, opulent European nightmare dressed as a movie. The film was meant to redefine her. Instead, it nearly erased her. With a script that morphed mid-production into something unrecognizable and a director, Erich von Stroheim, whose artistic vision often included financial ruin, the project spun out of control. Swanson, ever the perfectionist, kept pouring money into the disaster, trying to salvage something watchable. But by the time it was finished, if it ever truly was, the final product was too strange, too risque, and too expensive for release. The studio panicked. Swanson panicked. Audiences never got to see what she thought would be her masterpiece. She didn't go bankrupt, but she came dangerously close. The film was shelved, her momentum stalled, and Hollywood, never one to forgive a financial misfire, politely escorted her to the sidelines. She remained famous, but she wasn't trusted. And while Gloria tried to recover from a financial fiasco wrapped in artistic ambition, another actress made a decision that was less extravagant, but just as fatal to her future in Hollywood, saying no to the wrong people at the wrong time. 15. Louise Brooks. Louise Brooks had no interest in playing the Hollywood game, and Hollywood never forgave her for it. She had the kind of allure directors chased for decades afterward. Cool, magnetic, unknowable. But what made her special also made her a liability. She didn't fake charm for producers, didn't flatter journalists, and most fatally, she didn't follow orders. In 1928, after starring in Pandora's Box, Brooks refused to return to Hollywood to dub a film for sound. Her reasoning was straightforward. She believed the film didn't need it, and she had no interest in compromising her artistic judgment for technical conformity. But to studio heads, this wasn't principle, it was insubordination. She wasn't just declining work, she was challenging authority. And in a system that valued obedience over originality, that was a professional death sentence. Studios blacklisted her quietly. The offers dried up. Friends vanished. Her European successes weren't enough to save her reputation in Los Angeles, where memory is short, but grudges are long. Brooks later found herself broke, working odd jobs, writing about the industry that once lionized her. She eventually gained the critical acclaim she deserved, but only decades too late. And if Louise Brooks's career was dismantled by a single act of defiance, the next actress would find herself undone not by one moment, but by a storm of defiance, instability, and a system all too eager to brand her difficult and forgettable. 16. Frances Farmer. Frances Farmer never fit into the Hollywood mold, not because she couldn't, but because she refused to pretend it was worth fitting into. She was smart, intense, and outspoken, with a tendency to challenge authority that made studio executives deeply uncomfortable. She didn't want to be a starlet. She wanted to be an actress, the real kind. The kind that quoted Nietzsche between takes and rolled her eyes at fluff scripts. But in 1930s Hollywood, that kind of independence was seen as an illness. Farmer challenged directors. She rejected studio-mandated image makeovers. She criticized the very system that signed her checks. Predictably, that led to a string of increasingly public clashes with studio brass, legal troubles, and a reputation for being uncontrollable. Once that label stuck, the studio system wasted no time tightening the noose. What followed was a long, humiliating descent. A cascade of institutionalizations, arrests, and vanishings from the spotlight. The truth of her downfall became so mythologized that untangling fact from fiction feels nearly impossible. But one thing is certain, Frances Farmer didn't break under the pressure. She was cracked open by it. And the industry that claimed to love her talent was eerily quick to discard it when things got uncomfortable. And while Frances was being erased for her unwillingness to play nice, another star found herself punished for playing too nice. With the press, with the public, and with a marriage that played out under a microscope. 17. Jean Harlow. Jean Harlow lit up the screen with a kind of raw, electric vulnerability that made her feel both larger than life and strangely reachable. She wasn't just the original blonde bombshell, she was the blueprint. Studios loved her for her looks, audiences loved her for her attitude, and gossip columns loved her for everything else. But even as her career soared, her personal life turned into a sideshow the public couldn't look away from. It wasn't one decision that chipped away at Harlow's image. It was the accumulation. A series of high-profile romances, publicized heartbreaks, and a marriage that exploded under a magnifying glass. Her relationship with Paul Byrne, a powerful MGM producer, was supposed to be a stabilizing force. Instead, it became the epicenter of speculation and scandal. Though the studio worked overtime to control the narrative, whispers of dysfunction and emotional turmoil haunted her every red carpet appearance. Harlow kept working, through stress, through illness, through relentless public scrutiny, but the weight of it all began to show. Behind the platinum curls and punchy one-liners was someone being slowly swallowed by the machine. Even in her final films, you can feel it, a sharpness dulled by fatigue, a star dimming even as she's framed in perfect lighting. Hollywood didn't punish Jean Harlow deliberately, it just kept taking until there was nothing left to take. And while Jean's stardom was slowly worn down by exposure, the next actress didn't get that luxury. Her downfall came fast, brutal, and terminal, fueled by danger, fame, and an unsolved mystery that left more questions than answers. 18. Thelma Todd. Thelma Todd was Hollywood's sunshine in a cocktail dress, witty, magnetic, and effortlessly charming. She wasn't just another pretty face. She was one of the few comedic actresses who could hold her own alongside heavyweights like the Marx Brothers and Laurel and Hardy. Audiences adored her, studios profited from her, and for a while, it seemed like she had mastered the elusive balance between fame and likability. But off-screen, her life was messier. She ran a popular restaurant, socialized with the elite, and found herself increasingly tangled in circles that weren't just glamorous. They were dangerous. Associates with mob ties, financial disputes, romantic complications, it all played out under the surface of her polished image. Hollywood was a place where fame and risk often shook hands behind the curtain, and Thelma was standing right at the intersection. Then, in 1935, she was found dead in her car under circumstances that remain murky to this day. The official cause was carbon monoxide poisoning. The unofficial explanations range from accident to something far more sinister. No one was ever charged. No theory ever stuck. Her career didn't end with a scandal. It ended with a question mark. And Hollywood, always eager to move on, quickly did. But the mystery never fully faded. And from one vanishing act to another, the next icon made the fatal mistake of leaving Hollywood on purpose, at the height of her power. 19. Mary Pickford. Mary Pickford didn't just star in silent films, she defined them. America's Sweetheart wasn't a nickname. It was a brand, minted in celluloid and sealed in box office gold. She was co-founder of United Artists, a studio owner, a businesswoman before Hollywood even had a word for that. But for someone who climbed so high, her descent came not with a crash, but with a whisper, and it was largely her own doing. By the late 1920s, Pickford saw the writing on the wall. Sound was coming, and it was going to change everything. She could have transitioned. She had the money, the influence, and arguably the talent to make it work. But instead, she chose retirement. Or rather, she pre-retired, stepping away from leading roles while still in her prime, as if anticipating that audiences wouldn't accept her voice or her age. It was a decision born from control. She wanted to leave on her own terms, but the industry, ever fickle, interpreted it as surrender. By the time she tried to return, the landscape had shifted, and the door she once walked through had quietly closed behind her. Pickford faded into reclusion, remembered more for what she was than what she did. In Hollywood, nostalgia can be a prison, not a legacy. And while Mary quietly stepped off the stage too early, the next actress clung too long to a spotlight that had already moved on, insisting on leading roles while the audience had already started looking elsewhere. 20. Norma Shearer. Norma Shearer was the queen of calculated reinvention. She went from silent ingenue to modern woman, from wife of the boss to Academy Award-winning actress. At her peak, she was untouchable. But Hollywood adores youth more than history, and by the late 1930s, the cracks began to show. Her mistake wasn't scandalous. It was stubborn. She refused to adjust to the changing tides. As roles for women shifted, grittier, sharper, more grounded, Shearer clung to the image of the romantic heroine. She turned down Gone with the Wind, yes, that role, convinced that Scarlett O'Hara wasn't worthy of her. Instead, she picked safe scripts, period pieces, roles that made her look regal but out of step with the times. The audiences noticed. So did the critics. Reviews cooled. Ticket sales dipped. And suddenly, the woman who once carried entire studio slates was being outshone by younger stars who weren't playing queens. They were playing women. By the time she retired in 1942, it didn't feel like a swan song. It felt like a quiet exit through the side door. MGM didn't beg her to stay. The public didn't mourn. It was as if she disappeared into the shadows of her own legacy. And while Norma was trying to preserve her throne, another actress was busy abandoning hers altogether, walking away from Hollywood while still on top, and into a career few in America ever bothered to follow. 21. Dolores Del Rio. Dolores Del Rio was the kind of beauty that Hollywood didn't quite know what to do with. Striking, regal, and always just a little too modern for the roles she was offered, she broke barriers as one of the first Latina stars to lead in major American films. For a while, it seemed like she was going to bend the system to her will, elegantly, quietly, and without asking permission. But then she did something unthinkable by Hollywood standards. She left, not faded, not fizzled, left. At the height of her fame in the early 1940s, she turned her back on Hollywood and returned to Mexico. Why? To pursue more meaningful roles, work with serious directors, and escape the limited parts she was being handed as a glamorous ornament in studio films. Her return to Mexico wasn't a failure, it was a triumph. She became a star all over again, this time in the golden age of Mexican cinema. But Hollywood didn't see it that way. When she later tried to return, she was greeted not as a celebrated émigré, but as a relic. Too ethnic, too old, too foreign for the new American screen. Dolores wasn't blacklisted. She was simply forgotten. Quietly, conveniently, and completely. And while Dolores chose her exit, the next star never would have, because her final decision came not on a soundstage, but on a doomed plane, in the name of patriotism, and at the cost of everything. 22. Carole Lombard. Carole Lombard was screwball royalty, a comedic tornado wrapped in diamonds and wisecracks. She was sharp, fast, and uncannily relatable, the kind of star who could make a pratfall feel elegant. But her real-life persona might have been even more compelling than her roles. Patriotic, fearless, and hell-bent on doing her part during wartime. In 1942, she boarded a plane back to Los Angeles after a successful war bond rally in Indiana. It was supposed to be a victory lap. Instead, it was a final curtain. The plane crashed in Nevada, killing everyone on board. Just like that, Lombard, still at the top of her career, still in demand, was gone. Was it a mistake? Not in the moral sense. But in the cold arithmetic of cause and effect, yes. Her decision to fly back immediately, against advice, turned out to be fatal. Her death sent shockwaves through the industry, not just because she was beloved, but because it reminded everyone how fragile even the brightest star could be. Lombard didn't fade, she vanished. 1 minute, a headliner, the next, a headline. And if Carole's story was a patriotic tragedy, the next actress was a tabloid disaster, one whose chaotic love life and very public spiral became the blueprint for Hollywood implosion. 23. Barbara Payton. Barbara Payton was the cautionary tale Hollywood couldn't look away from. She had the looks, the buzz, the studio contract, everything primed for a classic silver screen rise. But what followed wasn't a rise, it was a nosedive in real time. And everyone was watching. Her downfall began not with a flop or a scandalous film, but with a love triangle so messy, it turned into a public spectacle. Caught between actors Franchot Tone and Tom Neal, Barbara's personal life became its own serialized drama. Neal and Tone's infamous physical altercation over her left one, hospitalized, and all three permanently etched into gossip column history. Instead of distancing herself, Barbara leaned into the chaos, making headlines faster than she made films. Studios, allergic to instability, dropped her. Roles vanished. Public sympathy soured into ridicule. She tried to recover, booking low-budget projects, clinging to fading fame, but the offers kept shrinking and the spotlight kept moving. By the time she was 30, her film career was effectively over, burned up in the heat of scandal she couldn't outrun. What remained was a tabloid shell of the promising star she once was. And if Barbara Payton's story was a public spectacle turned private tragedy, the next actress lived a quieter kind of collapse, fighting a battle within that Hollywood neither understood nor made space for. 24. Jean Tierney. Jean Tierney looked like she'd been sculpted out of moonlight. Delicate features, ethereal presence. She was the face directors loved to frame. But behind that serene beauty was a mind struggling to stay intact. Tierney's life was not marked by scandal, but by fragility, and an industry wholly unprepared to deal with it. In the 1940s, she became a star almost effortlessly. Laura, Leave Her to Heaven, The Ghost, and Mrs. Muir, each performance added to the mythos. But behind the curtain, she was battling deep psychological distress. In a time when mental health was still spoken of in hushed tones, Tierney's condition was labeled inconvenient, not important. She continued working through the early signs, hiding the symptoms, masking the fatigue. But eventually, the cracks showed. She took breaks from acting, sought treatment, and spent years in and out of institutions trying to regain her footing, not just as an actress, but as a person. Hollywood, of course, moved on. When she tried to return, the opportunities were fewer, the scripts less worthy. She had survived, yes, but survival didn't guarantee a second act. And from silent struggle to outspoken defiance, the next actress would take her reputation and set it on fire, one scandalous quip at a time. 25. Tallulah Bankhead. Tallulah Bankhead was less of a movie star and more of a one-woman genre. She wasn't interested in being adored. She was interested in being remembered. And she was. For her booming voice, her acid wit, her love of chaos, and her absolute refusal to play by anyone's rules but her own. While most actresses of her era were carefully polished by studios, Tallulah showed up like a human Molotov cocktail in furs. On stage, she was magnetic. On screen, she was underused. Hollywood didn't know what to do with someone so unfiltered. She was too loud, too brazen, too unpredictable for an industry that ran on image management and moral appearances. And Bankhead had zero interest in appearances. She partied hard, talked louder, and left a trail of raised eyebrows and dropped jaws everywhere she went. Directors admired her talent but dreaded her presence. Studios took her on, then quietly let her go. Her film career never quite took off. Not because she lacked ability, but because she had no off switch. In an industry built on illusion, she was almost aggressively real. By the time the roles dried up, Tallulah had become more legend than leading lady, known more for her outrageousness than her credits. And yet, she never apologized for who she was. She left Hollywood the same way she entered it, loudly. And with that final firecracker exit, we close the curtain. Not on the era's worst decisions, but on its most fascinating implosions. Because in Hollywood, the line between legacy and cautionary tale is always just one bold move away.